Mankind's greatest achievements are breathtaking.
Houston, you're go for landing, over.
Putting a man on the moon.
The Eagle has landed.
Unlocking the secrets of the atom. Transplanting an organ to save a life. But these all pale when compared to perhaps the most remarkable creation of all, our own living, breathing human body. We're about to take a journey that will chart our body's achievements from birth to death.
The whole idea that when you age, you're going downhill is absolutely wrong.
Reveal the extraordinary feats it performs every day.
It's a wonderful machine, unparalleled.
And change the way we think about ourselves forever.
What's most fantastic about the body is that all the time it's replacing itself.
This is the amazing life story of our body in numbers. From the moment we're conceived, our body begins racking up some pretty incredible achievements, effortless feats that we're completely unaware of. As we grow, our own individual DNA is continually defining who we are and what we will become. It's a truly extraordinary blueprint.
DNA is a code. It's the famous double helix, and every DNA molecule has got 3,000 million units of information in it. So it's pretty remarkable stuff.
And this is just the start. When we analyze a typical person over the course of their entire lifetime, the statistics generated reveal some astonishing truths about the human body. But we're not going to just tell you about them. We're going to show you, using never-before-seen images designed to lay bare some of our most spectacular capabilities. So let's start with the most fundamental question. What are we made of? According to the rhyme, it's snips and snails and puppy dog tails if you're a boy. Or sugar and spice and everything nice if you're a girl. In reality, most of our body is actually made of this. Water. It's in our blood. It's in every cell in our body. And it makes up about 70% of our mass. It's so important, and we use so much of it, that without a constant supply of fresh water, we'd collapse within a matter of days. But what about the rest of our body? What are its vital ingredients? The truth is, each of us contains an extraordinary collection of different chemicals. And if you tried to write down all the proteins, fats, alcohols, and acids that make up, say, little O gene here, it would take months. But there's an easier way of thinking about the components of his body, by comparing it to the mud pie he's making. Both are made up of chemical elements, the building blocks of matter. And virtually all the elements that make up O gene can also be found in his mud pie. In fact, there's even a connection between O gene, his mud pie, and the pencil his sister Honor is using to do her homework. One of the most common elements in the soil, and one of the biggest components in us, is carbon. It's also in the graphite core of Honor's pencil. But how much carbon do we actually contain? In fact, if you totaled up all the carbon in our body, it would weigh in at 30 pounds and 13 ounces. Enough to fill 9,000 pencils, which would make a really big pencil case. That carbon is used as the basis for virtually every cell in our body. It's what makes us organic. But the link between our body and O gene's mud pie doesn't stop here. Another key ingredient links it with toothpaste, cheese, eggshells, and the blackboard at school. Without calcium, we'd all be just blubbery blobs, as it's a key constituent of our skeleton. A lack of it can lead to osteoporosis, or brittle bones, which is sadly a condition that around 10 million Americans suffer from. The average skeleton weighs in at about 30 pounds, and each of us contains around 2.5 pounds of calcium, enough to make 266 sticks of chalk. It's a vital element in our body, but it's not the only one that gives our skeleton its strength.
Bones, very strong. It's as light as wood, as strong as steel. And it does that primarily through its shape and through the material that it's actually consisting of, which is mostly calcium and phosphorus.
Phosphorus is just as important to our frame as calcium, and it's an important component in the chemicals that release energy around our body. Since it's found in match heads, you could say phosphorus gives us our spark. And you might be surprised to find that each of us contains about 1.7 pounds of the stuff. Enough to make 2,200 match heads. So how are we doing with our mud pie? Take the elements we've mentioned, carbon, calcium, phosphorus, and add the hydrogen and oxygen in water, along with a dash of the nitrogen from the air, and we'd find that the majority of the elements in the mud pie make up a whopping 99% of the mass of our body. So what kind of oddball mix of elements might be in that last 1%?
I would tend to say some type of metal.
Maybe titanium?
Gold. I'm hoping there's not a lot of lead or mercury.
Tungsten.
That is exactly what I was just thinking.
Tungsten it is.
Uranium? Yeah, probably copper or something like that.
I can tell you're right. You see what those days? Yeah, you're right.
Is it?
Is it?
Yo, you're awesome, Hannah. That's awesome.
In fact, all of the elements mentioned here are present in our body. And incredibly, each of us does contain a minuscule amount of uranium. Although, not the kind found in a nuclear bomb. And all these different elements, some present in the smallest quantity, are essential to the way our body works. Take this, for instance. It's zinc. You can find it in these alkaline batteries. And it's one of the chemicals found in Louie's fast-growing brain. It's one of the metals that enables it to generate electrical signals, essential to the brain's operation. There's just 0.08 of an ounce in our body, less than there is in these batteries, but it's still a key ingredient. Distributed around our brain, and in more than 3,000 of the proteins in our body, the amount is crucial. Too much would poison our system, but a lack of zinc could lead to diarrhea, possible anorexia, progressive blindness, and hair loss. And the same is true of many of the rare elements in our body.
It's known now that some of these deficiencies of trace elements, manganese, selenium, and zinc, can cause specific forms of disease and organ dysfunction.
It's clear that our body contains an amazing cocktail of different elements, each one performing a vital role. But what would happen if we just lumped all those elements together? Well, given that phosphorus and hydrogen are extremely combustible in their raw state, what you would get would be this. Well, there's obviously more to us than just the elements we contain. It's the unique way they go together that make us who we are and allows us to do the things we do. And speaking of the things we do, there is one activity we spend nearly 1/3 of our lives on. The real question is, why is it so important in the first place? If you follow an average family, like the Williamses here, through a typical day, one thing becomes remarkably clear. The sheer number of activities we perform is phenomenal. But there's one action that dominates our lives like no other. Sleep. On average, each of us sleeps for 7 3/4 hours a night. And even though there'll be plenty of nights when it never feels like enough, it does add up. In fact, over a lifetime, each of us will spend a staggering 26.5 years asleep. It's a huge part of our life. But why? Well, ask any new parent, and they'd say it was all about getting some rest, trying to save up some energy for another day. But how much energy does sleep actually save us? We need roughly 1,600 calories to keep us going while we're awake. So conventional wisdom might say we save half of that by sleeping? No. Well, what about the equivalent of a light meal? No. In fact, the sum total of the energy we save by sleeping is this: 115 calories, or a slice of buttered toast. So if we're not saving much energy, what is sleep for? Well, while we sleep, our body is hard at work, performing a multitude of tasks, without any conscious instruction on our part at all. And we'd be completely unaware of these nocturnal activities if it weren't for the most fleeting of memories.
The dreams I usually remember are the ones where I'm being chased or like something dramatic's happening. And
like I was in this time machine and I could like travel to Vietnam like in 2 seconds.
A man made out of garbage. Very scary dream.
This like ghostly guy who's walking around all the floors and kind of like looking in all the rooms.
Probably like the falling dream from when I was little. Just like falling and you don't stop.
Last night I dreamt that my father bought a large house in Central Africa and we were all moving there. It was a nice house. It was huge.
Dreams occur when our sleeping brain is at its most active. We go through several dream cycles every night, which means we'll spend around 55,089 hours, or 6 years of our life, dreaming. And if each dream were recorded on a DVD, then we'd make around 140,000 dream DVDs during our life. Enough to fill this store 70 times over. Nobody really knows why we dream, but some scientists believe that this is when we sort through our memories. Our lives are so busy, it's perhaps no great surprise that we struggle to remember everything we do. For instance, what were you doing a month ago last Tuesday?
A month ago last Tuesday. Last Tuesday.
I don't know. What was I doing?
What's today? Tuesday? Wednesday? Wait, what was Tuesday's date? Last Tuesday?
Oh, I wouldn't remember that, but I have my calendar book right here, I can tell you, but otherwise I wouldn't remember it.
But we can all remember details from decades ago, as if they were only yesterday.
My earliest memory was my mom and dad having an argument, and I was about 3 or 4 years old. But it was a loud one.
I must have been about 2, and my mom was leaving for work, and I remember being terrified that she was leaving.
Somebody looking into my baby carriage and saying, "Oh, it's a nice baby."
I remember eating ants in preschool.
I remember lying in a crib and seeing the colored bars of the crib, and at that time they were no bigger around than my little finger. These are very small bars, and they're in the colors of pea green, pink, yellow, blue, and white. And I remember that.
So how on earth does our body pull off this amazing memory trick? Some scientists think that dream sleep is when we are tidying up the memories in our brain, considering which pieces need to be retained, figuring out how they need to be accessed when we need them, and dumping all the rest. Effectively, we're giving our memory banks a spring cleaning every night.
The brain has the capacity to store thousands and thousands of information. It's just that it chooses not to, and most days we throw out 90+ 1% of information we're exposed with, because frankly, they're not worth remembering.
Our brain's ability to manage information is absolutely stunning. Just try listing all the things we need to remember each day. Faces, names, phone numbers, PIN numbers, dates, directions, spelling, mathematics, how things work, how to read, how to love. The list is endless, and yet we retain and use all the right information without even thinking about it.
Well, it's amazing that we can retain what we want to retain, and our brain is very efficient at filtering out the information that's just not important.
But this ability to store memories doesn't just help us on a day-to-day basis. It also gives us our identity. It allows us to remember who we are.
You're not physically the same thing when you're 50 that you were when you were 5 years old. And yet, memory provides you with continuity. It actually creates the link that makes the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old, and the 50-year-old the same person on a timeline. And that's, I think, what we have for memory, is that we actually can make a continuous person over time and space, which I think is a truly remarkable thing about human memory.
Getting a decent night's sleep helps us store a lifetime's worth of memories. But it's not just our mental faculties that get sorted out when we sleep. Our physical well-being is at stake as well. When we look more closely at how our body protects and replenishes itself, the numbers get really out of control. During deep sleep, we can be difficult to wake up. In fact, we go into a mild form of cryogenic suspension during this phase of sleep. Our body temperature goes down a couple of degrees, and blood is redirected from our head to our body. And it does all this for a good reason. This is when our body is hard at work, repairing itself. If you feel feverish and dozy, like young Maya here, it's a giveaway that your body is busy fighting off an infection. And the front line looks like this. These are white blood cells. Like any kind of soldier, there are all sorts of different types, but they fall into two basic categories. Imagine this car is an infection. The first kind disables invading organisms, marking them for destruction. The second type of white blood cell attacks the organism directly, destroying the infection. Our body is generating billions of new white blood cells every day, a rate that can virtually triple when we are fighting off an infection. That means at any one time, our blood can deploy around 39,875,000,000 white blood cells. That's nearly 6 times the number of people on Earth. And without this army on permanent standby, we'd probably not survive long enough to reach our first birthday. But that's just one of the amazing healing properties our blood can unleash. Look at the world through paranoid eyes, and the opportunities for accidents seem endless. There are all those scrapes we pick up playing as kids, paper cuts in the office, accidents in the home, an incident with broken glass. Fortunately, most of us will be as good as new within a few days. All thanks to our incredible self-repairing body. Our blood is full of sticky cells called platelets that are designed to form clots. So when we start bleeding, they stick together to plug the hole. And our body contains a truly monumental number of them. Just this teaspoon holds over 1.3 billion platelets. That's one for every person in China. And clotting isn't the only magic trick all those platelets can pull off. They also produce our body's equivalent of a Band-Aid, fibrin strands, 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. These strands can stretch up to 6 times their length to pull a wound back together. And we produce millions of them. A teaspoon-sized clot contains around 13 million fibrin strands. That's more than the population of Greece. And if you line them up and stretch them out, they'd reach 84 yards, nearly the length of a soccer field. But the importance of our blood in the healing process doesn't stop there. It even plays a part in repairing more serious injuries, like a broken bone.
Something like 50% of us will have orthopedic surgery at some point in our life. So it's very common that we break bits, at some point in our life.
Modern medicine makes a huge difference to our ability to recover from fractures. But ultimately, without our amazing self-repairing body, the best treatment in the world would be of minimal use. Take this woman, Amanda Dean. 2 years ago, her knee was crushed in a serious car accident. Despite getting the best medical treatment available to repair the damage, this amateur athlete faced the prospect of potentially never being able to run again.
The reconstruction on the table was good, but that doesn't guarantee the joint will regain normal movement and the knee joint will regain normal strength. And so a lot depends on how much the patient's own body is able to make use of the reconstruction that's been provided.
But a mere 6 months later, she was already able to jog, thanks to the incredible healing power of her own blood and bone.
Very important thing about bone is that it's very much alive and it's full of blood vessels and nerves and just like any other tissue, and that it doesn't just sit there like a table leg and do nothing other than sort of prop us up. It's moving all the time and looking after itself and rebuilding itself.
Stimulated by her blood, the bone-generating cells in Amanda's knee effectively reconstructed the whole area around the joint. Thanks to these, she made a stunning recovery.
I was actually quite surprised how quickly she got her knee movement and her knee power back. And I think there's probably something individual in her makeup that helped her achieve that level of recovery.
And it's not just after an accident that our body does this. The very act of walking, stretching, moving, and lifting stimulates our body to generate fresh cells. And not just in our bones. Waking or sleeping, we're constantly generating new skin, new organ cells, and new blood. But if everything inside us is regularly being renewed, could that mean our body is actually far younger than we think it is? We can think of our body like an enormous factory, constantly building new components, new cells, to replace the ones that break or wear out. Take our fingernails. We will grow 113 inches of new fingernail in our life. Enough to do this 127,755 times. And what about our hair? Each of us will need around 650 haircuts during our life, just to keep it under control. And if you collected up all that cut hair, there'd be 30 2/3 feet of it, enough to make 36 of these wigs. This process of bodily regeneration is happening throughout our anatomy. But if we're continually rebuilding ourselves, replacing old cells with new, it begs the question, how old is our body?
Physically, I'm probably, I'm 37, but I feel like I'm 20. Psychologically, I'm about 8.5, but that's a whole other issue.
Maybe 2/3 of the time it feels about 26 or 27. I'd say today it feels about 40, tired.
About 16.
Like I'm 27, but clearly I look like 18.
It's a bit of a trick question. The truth is, different parts of our body replace themselves at different rates, which means none of them are the same age.
What's fantastic about the body is that all the time it's replacing itself. Of course, it's not replacing itself at the same rate throughout the body. In the central nervous system, for example, in our brain and in our spinal cord, it's slow. So there's a huge variation throughout our body. But in general, of course, we're being replaced all the time.
Back at our factory, Al and his colleagues are busy making bottled drinks. This requires them to remain scrupulously clean, which means a lot of wear and tear on their skin. So it's a good thing that we produce enough skin cells every 3 weeks to make an entire bodysuit's worth. Over a year, that'll add up to this: 17 complete skins, or 1,352 during the course of your life. And what about the drink in all those bottles? Every day our stomach is filled with powerful acids designed to break down the great variety of food and drink we consume. Confronted by such aggressive chemicals, our body responds by generating enough raw material to make a new stomach lining roughly once every 5 days. Over the course of a year, that means we'll generate 73 new stomach linings, enough to put the skin on 400 sausages. But it's obviously not just our stomach that takes a beating from all that eating and drinking. Our liver is also a crucial component, responsible for processing nutrients and detoxifying our blood. It too is generating new cells, but being such a complex and large organ, it takes weeks rather than days to replace itself entirely. Even so, we generate enough new cells to make a fresh liver every 57 weeks, or 70 over the course of our life. One for each bag of detox tea we've laid out here. And what about our skeleton? The framework that allows us to jump, run, and play. It weighs about 30 pounds and accounts for around 20% of our total mass. So replacing all our bone cells takes a long time, a decade on average. But that means our skeletal self is no more than 10 years old at any given point. And over the course of our life, we'll have generated enough bone for 12.5 skeletons, which would make for quite a party on Halloween. However, by far the most impressive replacement job our body performs is on our blood. It's so important to the workings of so many bodily systems that producing a regular fresh supply is crucial to our well-being. On average, each of us will replace the entire contents of our bloodstream, all 9.5 pints of it, once every 4 months. And over the course of your life, you'll generate enough new blood to fill 2,060 of these blood donor bags. Without this astounding capacity to replace our blood, our bodily systems would break down within a matter of weeks. So taking all this into account, is there an average age for our bodily parts? The best research, based on samples of gut and muscle, suggests that every adult's body is about 15.5 years old at any given time, making us all a lot younger than we thought. But if most of our body is replacing itself over and over, that does beg the question, why do we age?
We age
for pretty much the same reason that a car breaks down. It has the brakes, the electrical system, and so on. And with use, those systems evolve sort of little faults, damage, and eventually your car breaks down. So, for example, we think about the skin classically as getting thinner and drier as we get older. And the reason for this is that the cells in your skin are regularly called on to divide to fix the tissue. They don't have an infinite capacity to do this, and after a while they stop being able to divide.
What's amazing about our body is not that we age, but that we age so slowly. Imagine it like a photocopying process. The first few times something is photocopied, the copy is virtually indistinguishable from the original. But after a while, imperfections begin to show. Carry on the process 1,300 times, equivalent to the lifetime replacements of our skin, and the final photocopies look nothing like the original. However, compare that to our own copying process, and one thing is immediately clear. Our body does a fantastic job at reproducing a near-perfect copy over years and years. There are, however, some parts of your body that don't get constantly replaced. And with good reason, because they're the most important parts of all. While much of our body is regenerating itself, there are some parts that replace themselves so slowly that many of the cells that make up these body parts are the ones we grew up with. The best example is the most complex organ in our body, our brain.
The brain is amazing. The brain controls everything that we do. It allows us to understand what it is that we see. It allows us to understand what we hear. We can communicate with people. It coordinates our motor activity. And all at the same time, it's the executor for all of our internal functions, our breathing, and the brain is still active while we're sleeping. So it's a wonderful machine, unparalleled.
This phenomenal ability to handle a multitude of simultaneous tasks is thanks to our neurons, very specialized cells capable of generating electrical signals, processing information and instructions. We have 100 billion in all. Pound for pound, our brain is the biggest on the planet. It weighs around 3 pounds. By comparison, a sperm whale's brain weighs 20 pounds. Not a great surprise given the relative size of a sperm whale, which tips the scales at a colossal 110,000 pounds, or 55 tons, about 639 times the weight of the average person. If the whale weighed the same as us, its brain would be minuscule, weighing just half an ounce. Conversely, if we weighed the same as a sperm whale, our brain would weigh 1,917 pounds, just under a ton. But surprisingly, the size of your brain, or indeed the number of neurons, is not what determines your intelligence. Albert Einstein is generally acknowledged to have been a pretty smart guy. But when his brain was examined after his death, it was found to be slightly smaller than average. What made him clever was not the size of his brain, but the number of connections within it. The connections in your brain are called synapses, and the more you use your brain, the more they develop.
When you learn new information, new synapses are formed. Synapses are contact points between brain cells, and the more synapses a person has, the richer their brain is.
On average, each of us will develop around 100 trillion synapses at our peak. But keeping this complex organ in tip-top working order is no easy feat. Even though it only accounts for 2% of our weight, the brain demands a whopping fifth of all the oxygen we will ever breathe. In fact, by the age of 70, it will have consumed enough air to fill this giant brain balloon 11 times over. Our brain also requires protection, and we can all think of occasions when we've banged our head, and sometimes even stunned ourselves. A thick skull helps, but without another of the body's little tricks, the pain would have been a lot worse. This racing driver's helmet could save his life in the event of a high-speed accident. But as he whips around the circuit, his head is thrown around, experiencing a force of over 2G. What he really needs here is some kind of shock absorber. It comes in the form of a liquid, cerebral spinal fluid, which surrounds our brain, nourishing and cleaning it, and cushioning it from violent movement. Our body needs a regular supply of fresh spinal fluid. In fact, each day it produces just under a pint, which supports and nourishes our brain and the entire spinal cord. This supply is crucial. Without it, our brain wouldn't function at all. And over a lifetime, its production adds up to this: 26,728 pints worth. Enough to fill 290 beer kegs. But when it comes to analyzing what our body achieves over the course of a lifetime, this is just a sample. From the moment we are conceived to the moment we die, our body effortlessly carries off a string of achievements that makes anything man-made seem paltry by comparison. And it's only as we fast forward through life that those achievements become clear. All of us start life like this, a single cell. But how many will that initial cell eventually lead to? Well, every adult has around 100 trillion cells. And as we're constantly generating new ones to replace the ones we use up or wear out, we'll make about 12 quadrillion cells during our life. One of the first organs those cells form is our heart. It starts beating just 4 weeks after we're conceived, and it will beat 2.8 billion times more before we die. But how much blood will all those beats pump? Well, by the time we reach adulthood, our heart will be pumping 2,113 gallons a day, enough to paint this entire ship twice over. And over the course of our life, it will pump over 50 million gallons, enough to cover a soccer field to a depth of 58 feet. The first milestone in our life is being born. Suddenly, our world changes forever. Within seconds, we'll take our initial breath. The first of 490 million we will take during our lives. But how much air will we breathe over this time? As an adult, we'll breathe enough air every day, 388 cubic feet, to fill all these balloons. Over a lifetime, that will amount to over 9 million cubic feet. Almost enough air to fill the whole of the Capitol building twice over. Initially, we'll only drink milk, but it'll not be long before we start eating solid food. So how much food will we eat during our lifetime? Well, by the time we're graduating from high school, we'll be eating the entire contents of this table, a whopping 1,102 pounds of food every year. Over a lifetime, that adds up to a staggering 84,854 pounds, or 42 tons of food. That's about the same weight as a fully grown humpback whale. And all that eating will take up a full 5 years of our life. We'll also spend a lot of time drinking, which means we'll consume a lot of this. We need water to maintain our cells, our blood, and virtually every other fluid in the human body. But just how much will we drink? In fact, by the time we reach the average life expectancy for the developed world, 78 years, we'll have drank 9,001 gallons of the stuff, enough to fill 162 of these barrels. Most of that food and drink is used to run our body, but we'll still be left with around 5% of it as waste, and we'll spend 28 weeks of our life on the toilet getting rid of it. Much of the energy we get from that food will be used to propel us from one place to another. But just how far will we walk? Add it all up, and we'll each cover about 65,000 miles during our life. All that exercise means a lot of perspiration. Bucket loads, in fact. If you collected a lifetime's production of sweat, it would look like this. A whopping 3,750 gallons of sweat, enough to fill 548 of these buckets. By the time we've given up counting our wrinkles, we'll have spent nearly 17 weeks of our life laughing. And happy or sad, we'll have shed enough tears to fill 4,533 of these eye drop bottles, 143 pints worth. Each of us is the owner of a truly remarkable creation. Our body. It repairs itself, regenerates itself, and gives us a life expectancy far longer than any other mammal on the planet. So let's hear it for our magnificent, amazing, wonderful human body.
接下来，历史的教训改变了新一代建筑及船舰的设计，影响了人类的未来。耐久工程日日新，接着播出。